Welcome to the Augmented Society Network. It's a thematic network as part of the Royal Society of Arts and Manufacture. We explore, collaborate and reflect on the future of human interaction with technology. I love technology, but not necessarily what we as humans do with it. Some things are glorious, some things are less so. Thank you, Ava, for a fantastic Cyber Salon session earlier this week as well about digital sovereignty. Some really great input, and that's a London, but again, global-based group of very interesting people. Please be respectful to everyone here, and it will be published as a podcast at the augmentedsociety.org website. This is a two-part series, so this is the second part of Reassessing Value. And we're very grateful for Richard Reisman being with us today, as well as one of our experts in this field. But we don't really have panels at the Augmented Society. We just have incredible people. So please feel free to dive in with your thoughts, opinions, experiences, and so on. Pick up really from where we left off. And last month we were looking at measuring values, measuring what we consider to be valuable, particularly in the new world as we do not see it currently. We were looking at examples of where systems have been established and may be working well. The questions for us today basically are looking at tools for measuring value and wealth. I know that Bitcoin is at a peak currently. And with Ava earlier in the week, we were talking about microcurrencies or localized currencies. Is it time for us to realize and define our own tools of value, but equally to consider emotional value and what we consider our experiences and the values that we find within them? As we know, millennials look to experience over things. But equally what I'm seeing as well, and I'm sure you all are, is high street shops moving to the dark side, as it's recorded at bbc.co.uk, where they're actually using their high street stores to operate as distribution centres. So we are seeing differences in approaches in many, many different fields, currency, value, wealth, etc., just being one of the enormous subjects that we've chosen to talk about.
When you talk about high street going dark, I thought you were to the dark side. I thought you were making some jab at Debenhams that's closing their doors after how many
or Bon
centuries?
Marché, for example, that's recently imploded. There's probably a whole session in that conversation,
Probably.
actually, which is handy because that's where we'll be in the new year. I'll come back to that when we leave. So, Dick, do you want to give us a summary of where we were last time?
Yeah, I can try. It's a little hard. It's a little hard for me to separate sort
of course
where we were last time with what I want to, sort of add to it. But sort of a few thoughts. One is sort of the value is very multidimensional, and that's I think was the main theme. And I sort of start. Well, I go back to markets as sort of being essential, and I think we're very critical of markets, but they have a key role. Adam Smith, sort of crystallized how markets work and how they're efficient at creating value. There's actually an interesting book that I have here. It's called How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life, and the subtitle is Unexpected Guide to Human Nature and Happiness, because he really was focused on the beneficial side of markets, even though some of that's been forgotten and distorted, with Milton Friedman, who took things to an extreme. And I think part of the issue is that government has sort of abdicated its role in markets to a large extent, and it needs to put boundaries on the markets are supposed to do and how they work, and within the donut model and whatever externalities, all that kind of stuff. And we talked some about that. There's the distinction between price and cost as a simple metric of exchange, and value as the broader issue of what people, the ends that they want. And another visual, there's a book called The Ends Game that gets to outcomes as sort of people are starting to realize that, that's the real thing, is the outcomes that a business is working toward. He's actually one of the co-authors there, co-authored one of my papers on fair pay. And it's a very good book. We talked some about the donut model, corporate social responsibility, Bhutan's gross national happiness, going beyond gross domestic product, which is a more narrow conception of exchange value, whereas these other things try and get to broader senses of value. We talked some about creative stuff, passion economy, some artists here. We're talking about value in creative work and how a lot of that can be at a small scale, even though the economies sort of favors the economies of scale and network effects that make big businesses essential for some things, but not necessarily everything. And how do we sort of mix the benefits and get the best of both, which brings, goes back to pricing versus things like hedonic value. There's an interesting paper on procedural utility that says how something is done is key issues are what kind of value are we talking about? How do we quantify it? When is it judged and measured? And for whom are we talking about? And I think that the for whom or to whom is kind of critical at getting a lot of this, because business tends to focus on the business to the customer and that value exchange. And sort of the core of my fair pay stuff is at that level. But then it broadens the concept of value to what's the value to the employees, to the community, to the environment, the stuff that the donut is getting into, which I would term as indirect values. And so I think what we really need to get to is negotiation, how exchange works in our markets and our ecosystems, to consider both the direct value and the indirect value in a sensible way. And I think that's what these issues with donuts and corporate social responsibility are trying to get at. So I've got some further thoughts on sort of the evolution of how this has been changing over the years. I can do that now, or if you want to break for some discussion.
Dick, what if you were to throw that in at the times, just in terms of setting? I do have to throw out that when we talk about donut and GDP, like maybe this is silly, but I'm sort of ruining the fact that the EU came up with GDPR, because I'm so used to saying GDPR that I'm sure I sound like an idiot hundreds of times talking about GDPR versus donut as opposed to GDP. Mitch brought up in the chat, are we going to discuss behavioral economics as opposed to the classical economics? And Dick, what you were talking about just now was to me, more about the classical economics as opposed to the behavioral. And I think that when we start talking about donut or the well-being element, we do need to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems that too much is, if we just correlate donut economics to GDP, we're still in that classical, we're still thinking in the classical term of economics as opposed to the behavioral or the well-being or the feel-good economics. As we are about society and humans and how they interact and how we look at things together, I think I would love to explore that deeper as we get into this, is how do we turn the tide of people to move away from their comfort zone of what they know. So we've seen across the board, even somebody can be ruining their life and everything in it, and like, this is horrible, I want to change it. And then when the opportunity comes to change, they don't. So I'd love to, if we can get into that kind of conversation as well.
Well, I've got some comments on that, because actually fair pay is really based on behavioral economics. And I think economics is starting to realize that the classical sense is just too narrow. A purely rational person who's trying to maximize their benefit, as opposed to behavioral economics. And I focused on, there's people who talk about homo reciprocans, which is the person who reciprocates. And the idea that you give me benefits, I give you benefits, and you care about the welfare of society. But I don't think it's as simple as pricing and stuff like that as opposed to the bigger picture. I think the problem is it just hasn't figured out how to expand to look at the multiple dimensions and how to negotiate over these multiple dimensions in market exchanges. And that's sort of been the focus of my fair pay work, how this stuff applies to nonprofits. It can apply to social responsibility by getting the customers and other stakeholders to have some say in it. It's not purely the business executives doing it. But also part of behavioral economics is that people are basically irrational. Dan Ariely's books are, several of them have irrational in their title. Kahneman talks about thinking fast and slow. We instinctively do things that are not rational because they're good heuristics. So the problem is that classical economics has taken a very narrow view of the world, but it is changing. Behavioral economics only started, 20, 30 years ago.
I think, obviously, I don't know if everyone's reading Surveillance Capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah, like you can tell which book I'm reading at the time by what I talk about. But I wonder if that, that is changing, Dick, because of futures being modeled in terms of what surveillance technologies are enabling.
Yeah, I think so. There's an interesting article in Foreign Affairs that, and How Do We Save Democracy from Technology is the title, by Francis Fukuyama and several other authors. And I'm working on writing a commentary. I've already contacted them because it relates to some things I'm doing. I think they missed one thing in their title. It should be Saving Democracy from Bad Technology, because I don't think the problem is the technology. The problem is how we're using it.
It's exactly what we do with it, as human beings. And there's a fantastic element in relation to capitalism as well in the book.
Right.
Where there's capitalism, it's a quote from way back, actually. I should be clear on my quotes, but capitalism shouldn't be eaten raw. It should be cooked by democracy. And I wonder if some of what you're talking about there, overlaps on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been sort of critiquing, I think the surveillance capitalism has sort of gone to an extreme in her book, because it's a beautiful criticism of what's wrong with it now. But I think that's because, and I think we talked some last time, the business model is an advertising-based business model which doesn't serve the user. So they can change, surveillance can be good. And I was in a session, I put a link in the chat. There's been an interesting series of things that are now on YouTube from Techonomy that's on health and wealth, which is a related theme. And the point I was making is look at things like COVID tracking and tracking of vaccines to know who's gotten their first shot but not their second shot, and all of that kind of stuff, which involves a huge amount of very personal data. So surveillance and tracking personal data can be a good if it's managed properly. And the real issue is not who's collecting data, but what are they doing with it? And it's hard to control what they do with it, but that's the real issue, is whether they use it improperly, not so much whether it's collected.
I wonder if we're all a bit late to this in a way. We should have been having these conversations 30 years ago. Clearly we didn't, because we were so deeply in love with technology.
Right.
That my nephew wants an Apple Watch for his birthday, and I feel like writing to him and saying, understand what you're giving up, understand the value, and weigh that up against what you're going to pay for it, because they're not going to match up. But there we go.
So it's interesting because when you bring up real value, the question of real value, and it sort of points to a question that Rashida put up in chat of, what would be the criteria of consumer trading off model between values of goods or services in a context of different products when it's difficult to differentiate real value. It's still about systems, and then it comes back to me always, well, then who controls the system? And is it, if we talk about a barter thing, then it's also human nature that nobody wants to feel like, I just made a good deal, I traded 3 hens for a cow, like, look at me. And then somebody says, oh, I could have gotten 2 cows for 3 heads. Like, there's that aspect of it as well, which is hard when there's not that normalcy, just because of human nature of concerning about their own value.
Well, that gets to the discussion we were having of scale, I think, which is we've sort of automated in a simplistic way that we just, replicate the same algorithms for everybody, instead of coming up with more flexible architectures that let you have, more customized algorithms and deal with specific subcommunities. Social networks can structure subcommunities that have their own norms, and they can learn what the norms are within those subcommunities. And I think that's where it's going. As you get to machine learning, artificial intelligence, it's going to be much more adaptive, much more flexible. And that's really where
have you or anybody else on this seen models of even just the kernel of that happening, like just the seed, the start of that in a real environment?
Yeah, it's limited. There's a lot of personalization in, like your email programs. You can personalize how it presents things. In your social media, you can control your social network to some extent, who you friend, who you don't friend, who you unfriend. Twitter, I don't know if it was here somewhere we were talking about, you can get really good information on Twitter if you're selective about who you friend. It's a really useful tool.
Yeah, I think Wendy was talking about that last time.
Actually, if you remember, Jonathan, I downloaded all my Facebook data and I ran it through Watson Discovery, and I found out when I was popular and when I wasn't. And I went through a period in life when I was making friends day after day, and then it all dropped off, and I thought, what have I done? What's happened? There was a period where I was just not popular or friendable. That makes me think of something, Amy, we've been talking about, which is the right to sanctuary as well. How much value do you put on sanctuary, your ability to step outside of whatever value systems we're inevitably being asked to weigh up on an hourly, minute by minute basis?
Yeah, well, I think you want systems that change with the time. One of the patents I did a while back was that your search algorithms, you should be able to change your task. They should change with your task if you're doing work, as opposed to whether you're doing entertainment. You want something light, you want something challenging. You're in a flow state, it should track your flow state.
More of there was an article ages ago of a lady in Wales, in the United Kingdom, who had wrapped herself in tinfoil and was demanding her right for sanctuary. How are we? I know I would put a huge value on having sanctuary, but defining what I mean by that as well is questionable, because I'd probably still want my phone in my pocket.
Well, I sort of suggested what I call it as a semi-permeable membrane, and you can adjust how permeable it is depending on the mood you're in and how much sanctuary you want. The Fukuyama article in Foreign Affairs actually was arguing for part of what I proposed, which is that, for example, with the social media, the user should be able to control the filters, and there should be an open market in the filters so that your feed isn't controlled by Facebook or Twitter. It's controlled by these add-on filtering services that you can decide what kind of stuff you want to see and don't see. And it's not a matter of setting a million complex parameters that you can't do. It's a matter of a market of services that do something that will appeal to certain people, and then you can pick the ones you like.
But the cat is out of the bag. I mean, my data is already somewhere, and it's been copied and pasted into another server somewhere that's then copied and pasted into another. And I'm with you, Dick, that whether it's that we utilize blockchain in a way that controls more and has micro contracts to say, well, you can use this data for X purpose or this amount of time. But unfortunately, how do we can turn off our device to make sure that nobody can check us or call us in that moment. But that doesn't mean that we no longer exist.
As someone that works with younger people, I mean, they're so desensitized, they don't even care. 99.9% of them, they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine with it. They are used to just living their lives on screen. And so it almost feels a little bit like, our generation's care for the environment, where I feel like my parents and grandparents were like, oh, care about the earth. And then after a while it became, global warming doesn't exist. Climate change doesn't exist. The earth and technology will find a solution. I feel like the youth generally thinks, surveillance capitalism, this data thing, it's kind of a problem, but we'll solve that later. So, I mean, yeah, the cat is out of the bag because, like you said, our data is already out there. And whether or not it's being used responsibly right now, who knows whose hands it's going to fall into 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years down the road.
Yeah, we should give some credit to the young people because, you know, we've run crypto parties about teaching people how to prevent their data from being leaked everywhere. And the moment you tell them that this data that they're leaving behind will only feed into one thing, which is the future employer will run a search on them and will find everything that's need to find. They go white and then go back home and delete everything.
I've said for a long time that kids do care about what they put online. It's just that their threat model is their parents. And honestly, I think a lot of these kids grow up and they work out codes among themselves so that they can talk without their parents really understanding what they're saying. And so they develop techniques that are actually going to be very useful to them in terms of obfuscating stuff later. I think the people who really don't care are the people who are working in the companies who built this stuff, and the people who think that they're powerless anyway.
Which is surely a growing group of disenfranchised people who are life is happening to.
But
Right.
let's not take away credit from society in general. Okay, so I've got a 12-year-old daughter that I keep on for the next 9 months. I get to say, well, COPA laws, so you can't do this until you're 13. And she's like, well, my friends are doing it, so why can't I? It's that pressure, you know, whether it was digital or whether it was just before we had this, when it was just about going to play pinball machine somewhere. And well, everybody else is going to play pinball, so why can't I?
Just think of yourself as lucky that you're living in a time when it's going online that you're worried about.
Yeah.
When I was her age, I wanted to learn to drive.
Glenn,
Right.
you'd raised your hand. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm sorry I joined a little bit later. I come from the aerospace industry, and a few years ago, I wondered if it was possible to create somebody I could rent that was me digitally. And my life, I've tried to segment my data packages between the major players, as they will not want to share their data. For conferences with Boeing and Airbus, and we capture a lot of data on the engines because that's how we can fix them when we land. This is actually a bunch of patents as well, but part of this idea is in the future that might be piloted, it might not be. We may arrive at the transportation system by a hyperloop. We may have a mobility device. We may have a autonomous vehicle, and the network might look like this in the future. There's a thing known as the CAN bus that the Deutsche Air industry actually created for the car industry. It's kind of become a standard. We use it too. It controls all the interiors. Once you actually transport yourself around the world and everything's autonomous and something happens to you, how do you ever prove what happened? Who owns the data? Does your phone own the data? And the whole idea and see some of the pattern things that there's you in whatever system. Maybe you're wearing sensors, maybe they're inside you. In the hospital after the incident, this system kind of looks after you. Now, one of the reasons I was doing this is I helped my mother-in-law years ago come to the States, and I kind of, watched over her more than once. And I thought in the future, if we had an autonomous system helping us and anything happened to us, say for instance, a large cargo shipping company like an Amazon or something was actually shipping you as your whatever you weigh from city to city, something happened, only the data that you were carrying would really tell the truth. There's more embedded into this, but I thought I'd share it to you because Boeing and Airbus shared the point that the more data, like an iWatch, if you now look at the apps, they've held off on blood pressure and some of the other apps they used to have, because it's one thing to get the data, but if you know somebody's in trouble and you do nothing with it, it's massive liability.
Right.
Yeah.
The next question goes, how often do you capture the data? Because I can tell you off an engine, there's streams and streams of data, all right?
So I think we'll all have our digital twins within 5 years. And there's some very interesting
We're
research.
not all even going to be vaccinated against coronavirus in 5 years.
No, that's just the start, Wendy. But there's some very interesting research actually in the virtual reality world, where there are adult workers who are actually sending their digital selves out to work and earning money, and they were asked whether they minded what was done to them, and that sparked some incredibly interesting conversations. I think you're right, Glenn. There will be, that's a runaway digital self, and again, who owns the data? Well, who knows at the moment, but it's not going to be the individual unless we do something about it. I think that's absolutely fascinating. So when you say if I were in an accident of some kind, are you suggesting there that I would just be deleted from a data perspective and they would deny all knowledge of sending me from one place to another?
Well, when Uber ran and killed that person with the Volvo, I wonder what the legal outcome was.
The blame landed on the human driver, which was predicted in a paper by Madeleine Claire Elish called Moral Crumple Zones. When you have a hybrid system, the human gets the blame.
One other thing that struck me, Glenn, with what you were showing was the idea that the same seat is used in all the vehicles. And yes, it was then transferred to the arm, but in the first diagrams, it was showing that you could use the same seat in each device. And
the technology in the seat, I should be more clear, because we all have the same bottom.
So, which then goes to the point of, it then becomes normalizing or universalizing all of these sets of data. And what are we, are we expecting that everybody is going to have the same parameters of data? Are we then looking at the citizen score that you see in China, where, because look, in our research, we've looked at the possibility of putting weight on somebody helping an old lady cross the street, or putting weight or giving value or a score to going and working a food bank, or mentoring somebody, or whatever. Like, you can name all the different variables. To me, the question is, if we were to look at East versus West now, we're having the issue in the West where people feel, I don't need to wear a mask because I'm only looking out for myself. Whereas in the East, it's all about, I need to help I'm part of society. I need to help society. So to even get East versus West aligned seems like a Herculean effort. So then we're talking about variables those are just two variables.
If I can say something, we worked on this project on coins for separate cities, so the micro coins. And I remember the conversation with the founder of Bristol Pound, which has run successfully for a couple of decades now. And he said something that has stuck with me, that you can't really put value on human exchange if you want to introduce micro currencies to towns, because if you start putting value on your time when you're babysitting and putting different value on your time when you're fixing my car and different value in you helping me to manage my pension, then you go back to the old money. So he said it's very important not to slide into that, because we've tried money and it doesn't work for the majority of society. So, the cleverest and the ones with highest IQ, whose parents were well educated, emerge in the top. And it's called marriage, but it's not really marriage, it's just privilege that people want to follow. Then keep away from standard notion of value, because you have to reinvent what the new value is. And I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, one of the things that I sort of built into the fair pay idea is that value negotiation is individualized between the parties that are doing it. The value for a business to one customer may be very different from the value from a business to another customer, because you're right, it's very subjective.
Right, but then you talk about not just what the value is for the customer, it's also the value for the vendor. And unfortunately, due to biases or systems that have been put in place, some people, based on race, creed, whatever, sex, whatever, might sell themselves short when they could be asking more.
Yeah, well, I think there are ways to deal with that too. But yeah, it's very complicated, and there's lots of interacting. It's an ecosystem, with all these interactions. So you really have to take a systems view of it.
It's quite interesting as well in that some forms of blockchain are reassessing the value of sustaining the chain as well. And some are moving from proof of work to proof of stake.
Yep.
But proof of stake relies on the person with the most. I wondered if anyone had any views on that or any experience they could bring to the conversation.
Yeah, it seemed to me that proof of stake definitely seemed to have a lot of appeal, because that does get to a more basic thing where it has to do with reputation. The proof of work is, it's got huge costs in fuel. The electric power to do proof of work is huge.
So just to follow up on that, the proof of work requires massive computing power. It's a disaster from an ecological perspective. So if you're looking at blockchain to be part of the future, then the mechanism for making sure your chain is secured needs to change. And that's where the proof of stake comes in, which means the person with the most value or coin or token is the one that says which block comes next in the chain. Because whilst people consider that blockchain is secure, it isn't. It is absolutely depends on the value of the process of the next block. So I think that makes it a more interesting thing.
Well, that's work that a number of people are setting up at the moment, because there's two things that happen in technology. The cost of running your own currency digitally is actually very low, and the opportunity to make that currency interoperable with other micro currencies is low as well. So we kind of running the systems today that are based on the assumption that everything is expensive from the time when we had cash. Cash was expensive in every way. Now we're moving to digital. Digital is cheap in every way. So the key advantage of the current thinking about microcurrencies is you can follow the values of your currency. So if you happen to be of a certain preference, you can choose to use that currency. So let's say, Estonian krona or Swedish krona or Icelandic krona, and they all have certain values around them. So the digital krona could be available currency, but there's a set of values behind it, and you can choose to use it. And the cost of running those currencies have dropped dramatically. So basically, even a relatively small town could do that. When we used to look at Bristol pound or Manchester coin, we're always thinking paper money, and that's gone in every level. So we have an opportunity to rethink how can we facilitate for people to vote with their wallets. And there's double whammy here, double win, because not only you can choose to use money you've along the value system you prefer, but also you can choose to give these people your digital footprints, because if you do payment gateways and if you manage money, you get all the data, you get the best data there is, which is our financial data. So instead of, MasterCard or Visa or banks getting all this data and selling it to Google for a lot of money, you can just say, no, this is going to be given. My financial transaction data, which is the trophy of the trophies, will be given to Bristol pound or to Reykjavik krona in a way that will support their system. And if their system gives me security of my data, then it's even better. So we're building kind of like a track based on assumption that the cost of digital money is very low.
That's very interesting. I remember when I was asking for some competitor analysis in terms of a campaign, I didn't realize that actually it's the antivirus software, it's Visa, MasterCard, etc., that I would actually have to buy that data from. Those were the people that were actually collecting the data and had a hand on what my competitors were doing. So what you're saying there is actually that data would sit with the more localized currency, which gives it even more value. It's interesting here in Vegas, the cost of keeping money on a casino floor is huge and runs into the millions. Just to have the paper equivalent for the potential payout is a very, very expensive business indeed. That's fascinating.
When you say that digital currencies are cheap, are you what about the fact that I think Bitcoin uses more energy than several countries?
Yeah, but that's not true, Wendy. You know, I keep hearing that it's complete nonsense. Nobody mines Bitcoin on traditional energy because it's just not worth it. The only places left in the world that actually mining is either Sweden, where there's hydro, bits of China on hydro, and Reykjavik. You know, nobody else does anything because the cost of it would be just not worth the hassle. So let's just put it to bed because it's not happening anymore. Nobody does it on coal.
Good to hear that.
But the hydro is not unlimited either.
No,
right?
but hydro, you know, the hydro is a bit different because it tends to be in places where nobody lives. So in Sweden, the hydro is at the very top of the country where it's super dark and, you know, everybody would end up very depressed. So people generally don't live there, yet there is a lot of hydro. And the best thing Swedish government dreamt up is to support services that can be done locally because hydro does not transmit, you know, it's an energy that cannot be shifted very far. It has to be used locally. And as it happens, most of good places for hydro are nowhere near humans. So you really need to think through what's best. What's best is the data centers because they can generate the power locally and then serve remotely. And that's what's happening. And those data centers are used for many different things, but one of them is mining because the hydro electricity is very low cost if you use it locally, and you can't use it in any other way. So we actually have a surplus of energy, and the only people who still do data centers on coal is Amazon Web Services, Google, and Apple. Everybody else has moved off because it's crazy. They're the only people who can afford it. So they're the biggest polluter, much bigger than air industry.
And interestingly, here in Vegas, we have switch because the average temperature here in Fahrenheit is 73, which is the ideal temperature to run a server at. Excuse me if I'm wrong, I've forgotten my Celsius, but it's a perfect, the majority of the time it's at that fixed temperature. It's in the middle of the desert. It's perfect for that kind of work.
It's going to be hard for these entities that teach IT when they say, oh, get into IT where you get to move somewhere that's really dark.
Humans, it's all robotized.
Bitcoin is now a battery technology.
That's a good way of putting it.
You store the energy and you can send it anywhere and then use it.
Okay, with all of this, with Bitcoin's the major one, right? It is all prospective. You know, you can't really go into a store and swap, even put down your phone and say, let me swipe this and pay with this Bitcoin. Humans aren't able to really use it amongst each other for actual buying of goods or paying for services or those types of things, at least not for the vast majority, or I should say, at least not for a minority.
Jonathan's setting up the question I was going to ask, which was the thread that I'm sort of picking up on in the chat and sort of what we're talking about, that there are tons of different value sets that clearly exist. But I think everything kind of has tracked back to these ideas of wellness and happiness and maybe even connectedness, the fact that people are on this call. I was just trying to pose in the chat, and I'm sorry if this takes you off where you're trying to go, Jonathan, but I feel like that what seems to be what we need to sort of rely on are ourselves as humans to sort of be the arbiters of what we value as humans. So it's sort of this, are we saying, without saying it, that essentially there have to be these sort of multiple different sort of blockchain-esque approaches to saying that we trust a value system that we believe in? That's what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm not explaining it properly, but it just seems like that we keep coming back to who's the arbiter, what do we trust? It seems like it's us and ourselves. So then from that, how do we then be how do we build the trustlessness into whatever we value? That's sort of what I'm hearing.
Yeah, Mitch, you're alluding to the fact that money is something that is rendered available. Diggs, you're
despite
saying
my poor spelling,
something different, that it's that unrenderable. Sorry, Mitch.
I'm saying it's both, but I'm trying to figure out the unrenderable version of it. because we've seen the rendered. We just talked about how expensive it is. I'm just wondering what is the unrenderable, intangible trustlessness we can develop as humans?
The way I see it is that money is simply an exchange medium that you use to balance accounts, and you've got to come up with, a sense of value for either objects or experiences or services or whatever it is that you're exchanging. And you can do that by barter. You can do that out of the goodness of your heart, or you can come up with an accounting that says, we're exchanging this much value. There's a net difference between, you're getting all the value, I'm not getting much, so you have to give me money. And money is simply an accounting device for balancing out the value. And that's why it has standard values. That's why we talk about the gold standard and fiat standards and whatever. So I think money is deceptive. Money has nothing to do with value except that it is a unit that we use to balance out values.
I wonder if money will have any value at all when we're all let out in a few months' time. I wonder if meeting someone's going to cost me hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Or conversely, if we're not let out in a few months' time and more businesses go under, and so then the people that have amassed this financial wealth really have nowhere to spend it. It's sort of like that old, if you find a genie lamp and you rub it and you get your 3 wishes, if you ask for all money in the world, it doesn't do you any good if there's nobody that you can trade with.
Mm-hmm. You can spend it at Amazon.
Jeff Bezos will still be there. Also wonder about, as we all of different ages, periods in our lives, we've already talked about the students, the current students that don't care about what information they put out. I know me personally, through all of the periods of my life, I've valued things differently. I can't say that I had different value, but I valued things differently. And I'm 50. So like Carlos, when you talk about that king, talking about what makes happiness in the what means happiness in the 70s, it means something completely, or for the most part, very differently now in the 2020s.
Well, you're getting at a key thing, which is money versus time. As you get older, time gets more, you have more money, you have less time. That changes the equation. There's an interesting company I know called Paytime, which is getting people to watch ads in order to earn credits that they can use to buy Netflix subscriptions. And basically they're aiming at students who have more time than money, who can't afford to pay for Netflix, but they can watch a bunch of commercials so that they can get free Netflix.
But I've seen those companies, I mean, hell, back when I was at ABC 20 years ago, like, oh, here's something if they can't pay for cable, they do this to then trigger, and those companies come up and then they go away.
Yeah.
So
well, those I'd imagined had moved to the human in the loop AI, which I hope I never become. As an experiment, I tried being a digital Turk for a while, and I was asked to catalogue blouses, but I couldn't do it fast enough because it's short sleeve, mid sleeve, red, blue, all of these things. I just couldn't work fast enough. I earned 2 cents in a couple of weeks. And so that was clearly not a viable option for me because I got flustered and really angry. But I would like to just bring in something Amy was just saying about the tithing system here in Nevada and Utah next door. Clearly we have the Mormon faith, and they have a system of, I think it's 10% of your income goes, and then that's redistributed in times of need. Is that something that we should look at more in terms of our communities, or, crikey, what is a community these
or
days?
like you were saying before, like, is my 1 hour of time fixing your car truly worth more than your 1 hour of time scrubbing my toilet? Can we redistribute it in a way that seems fair without being socialists, communism, whatever? And also, why do we keep coming back to the idea that I want to maximize my profit or extract as much value as possible out of things? Are all humans like that? I don't know, because a lot of times I want to extract just what I need and then I'm good. Like, I'm happy. I don't need a giant plate of food. I just need to feel full, and then you can have the rest.
Is as soon as you start talking about them tithing, you also have to be aware that they're extremely good investors. The Mormons own the Marriott hotel chain, most of Hawaii, and a whole lot of other things. And they have been, they're all very hardworking. They don't drink, they don't smoke. Their 10% has gone to build really quite a substantial
It
financial
built a significant portion of Vegas. There's no question.
endowment.
Yeah. Diggs, did you want to come in?
Well, I was just going to Amy's point that when I was, the question I was posing actually wasn't really supposed to be rooted in money, but the answer was given in terms of the value of money. And that, I'm not knocking you, Dick. It's just, I just think that's a generational thing towards sort of what Amy was getting at, and that my thinking is not, and it was sort of, I really wanted to try to pull in Rashida and Carlos because I really love that happiness quotient that they were both talking about, and just the sense that what Amy was saying hit the head on what I was going to say.
So we've only got a few minutes left, and I do want to round up at the end to tell you what's coming next. But do we have any closing thoughts on reassessing value? Does anyone have something that's going to carry us through the next month? And
Carlos, on the spot, bring us to happiness. It's that season.
This topic is very interesting. I think it for all of us. Since it's difficult for me to put it in words, I start like writing things. And if you produce something and there is a well-being indicator of your workers, if your well-being of your workers go down, then you will be taxed. You will be punished, economically speaking. Then we will be going towards a value that take into account human beings, because right now value is just an economic indicator. It's not a holistic indicator, if you want to put it. So that's what I was trying to put. And for me, all this discussion should be about not the economic side of value, but happiness. I don't like that more. I like
maybe
more
fulfillment.
Flourishing, fulfillment, well-being, holistic well-being. And so we pay more for something that is doing something wrong to the environment. Right now it's happening, and we all agree with that. So if we use the same logic, then if we have a great place to work indicator and your company does really bad, then your price will go up. Then everybody will start thinking, oh, maybe I should produce this in a way that the well-being of the workers is sustained and improved every day, because society is punishing me for that. And well, that will be the line of thought. That's one. And the other one that I put that we didn't talk, even though in the chat, it's that inflation, for me, it's more about speculation. So in a way, Amy was saying, is maximizing profits and maximizing whatever. That's the logic behind inflation. And historically, you can see around when regions start developing, then prices start going high because of the invisible hand. That's nonsense. That has been proven even mathematically that's wrong. So we should also work towards reducing the impact of inflation in having more higher prices in things. Those will be my two.
So I think with that, I would certainly love to see the end of shareholder value and stock exchanges as being a value mechanism. And I wonder if we're coming to a place where that might happen. Tony Shea obviously very sadly died in November. He was concerned with employee happiness and had different metrics for success. So maybe we are seeing a turn. Maybe there is a future that we can all be happy in.
This is a long journey, and it is about, the collective discussion of what could be and pointing to the examples that have worked. Zoe, if I may, I'll just, coming next in the new year, you can check everything out on augmentedsociety.org to see past sessions, but also you can sign in for our upcoming sessions. In the next 2 sessions, January and February, we're going to be diving deeper into changing resource, or, and looking at how resources can be more agile as everything is changing around us, as we're, it's not the finite way of doing things. We certainly saw in the pandemic the need for that. So we're going to be digging a lot deeper into that. Something that's really exciting that we're doing that we don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about here, because you can still get involved. We're working on a truly fascinating next iteration, whether you want to call it a white paper, a blueprint, whatever it is, a look at what the future of education can hold. If we were to really start from scratch, see where we have opportunity to make education stronger, not just in our K-12 or K-16, but for all of society as a lifelong learning element. We've got 20 different fellows or people in our community that are, or not in just our community, in our global community. We've got 20 people representing 5 continents, from all backgrounds: educators, venture capitalists, tinkerers, philosophers, every bit of the way. It's really exciting to see what we're producing. It's just the journey of it is phenomenal. If you are interested in coming in as somebody that just to look over and give feedback, please reach out to Zoe or myself, and we'll get you involved. But it's really exciting. It could be a model of other things that we do as the Augmented Society Network. So really excited.
So that's part 1 is the 21st of January for resourcing change, and we're changing back to our 11 o'clock time from 12 o'clock. For a short while we were working with Australia, and we thought we should be kind that it was only 5 in the morning, not 4 in the morning. So, but we're actually reverting back to our 11 o'clock. So hopefully we'll see you on the 21st at 11 for our last of our pandemic sessions, resourcing change. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful, happy holiday time. I hope everyone is well and that we see you on the other side. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Cheers. Happy New Year. Love that reindeer.
Stop. Before you go, I came up for another conference and somebody invented the word. He just started clapping like this. Everybody clap. And he called it zapping, and it's just great.
I shall look into that. Thank you.
Love it.
All right. Cheers. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Adios.